So today we're going to be talking about the New Haven Innovation Collaborative and how to apply for a CT Next grant. You can learn more about the organization and our application at our website, nhvinnovation.com, as well as emailing me directly at mharris@nhvinnovation. I want to be available as a resource in developing your application or thinking through ideas. We also have additional teams or interns that can help with your research and drafting as you work towards a proposal. So the Innovation Places program was created by CT Next. It's a legislative initiative that the Senate Democrats were a particular champion of back in 2016. And the program is focused on 4 areas in Connecticut that were selected through a competitive grant. And so for the last 3 years, New Haven, as well as Stamford, Hartford, and the New London Groton area have run programs through CT Next, which is a quasi-public state entity focused on building entrepreneurial environment within Connecticut. And the focus for Innovation Places is how do we create a density of resources that can drive economic development, and both within the city and statewide for CT Next goals. As a local team, we have for the last 3 years been stewarding the CT Next Innovation Places grant. Previously, our organization was called the Elm City Innovation Collaborative, and for 3 years, a grant management team helped launch 17 new projects. And so this was based upon a competitive proposal that was put forward by a team that came together over 8 months of planning. And with the culmination of these 3 years, the board of the Elm City Innovation Collaborative decided that in order to launch a recurring and ongoing version of the work that we've been doing, that the organization needed to be restructured to allow more public participation, to have specific perspectives that were represented on our board and in our new organization, and have a set of values that were reflecting our goals for driving economic well-being in an inclusive and just way, while also positioning New Haven to be in a strong and vibrant position to launch new businesses and new careers. So the New Haven Innovation Collaborative was born and is launching this summer with a streamlined new board. This timing alongside COVID is an interesting challenge, both because it means that it's been difficult to meet in person, and a lot of our public outreach plans have really need to be restructured. But it does mean that this is a very good timing for resetting our priorities, so that this is an opportunity through this grant application to come up with what are the best investments that we should be making as a city and as a region in the post-COVID economy, and making sure that we are investing in the types of projects and programs that will support careers and businesses to survive through the COVID's economic impacts, and are establishing ourselves in the right foundations moving forward. So with this new board, we have 13 perspectives. You can learn about this more on our website. We have 2 universities represented, as well as 2 innovation centers that are particularly focused, one at Yale and one at the hospital. We have the City of New Haven, as well as 2 dedicated community perspectives. We also have 4 sector perspectives on different business areas: bioscience, food business, software, and healthcare, as well as a business founder and a business investor. So the opportunity that we have here is to develop programs through which we can support through matching grants to launch new projects. Typically, our grants have used a 12-month timeline with quarterly report tracking that we need to do to report back to the state. Our project awards have typically ranged from $40,000 to $400,000. And I think that shows the range that we're interested in supporting in the future, to make sure that we're being as impactful as possible. Now, this is the funding that you would potentially receive through us from CT Next, and this would represent half of the total cost. So for a program that was going to be a $200,000 12-month initiative, we would be able to contribute $100,000 towards that funding. What this means is that we most often spend our time on questions talking about what is the cash match and how is it calculated. For CT Next, there's a really big focus that the cash match needs to be expenses actually incurred, rather than in-kind expenses or estimations of value. What that means is that we need to document our expenses through things like purchase orders, payrolls, receipts, things that actually show money out the door that we can match against. That money can come from almost any source. We've had organizations that have done crowd-based fundraising through groups like The Great Give and online. We've had funders that have pulled their funding from their membership. So Make Haven is an example of a project that we helped to launch their new space. They have a membership of about 350 people, and the monthly dues that group pays helped fund the cash match for the capital expansion. But philanthropic fundraising, as well as new positions. The cash match that will qualify is really focused on new spending on the project that you're proposing. And so that means that previous employees typically do not count for cash match, but new employees or meaningfully retooled positions can. As an example here, there's a piece of equipment that through our instrumentation fund, we were able to purchase for Southern Connecticut State University, and as part of their BioPath program. This program trains Southern Connecticut State University students with the skills they need to get New Haven bioscience jobs. This piece of equipment, we literally took the invoice for its purchase and just split it down the middle as a reimbursement to the program, which is one easy way to calculate a cash match, particularly for capital expenses. The next aspect of our program is based upon quarterly reporting. And the quarterly reporting means that about 10 days after the end of each quarter, you send back to us in a format and a template that we have key milestones that you've met as part of your program. And so milestones can be things like launching a new cohort of a business support program. It can be opening a facility. We've had milestones that have included for our talent training programs, graduating a cohort of computer science students with a 90% pass rate of their certification test. And those are sort of the key things that you want to think about as you're developing your application of what are those key milestones going to be. And we want to use these to sort of define what success looks like, as well as being able to track if something is going wrong. We want to be able to step in and be helpful early on before inertia takes over. The next thing that we need are activity metrics. And so these are much more things like event attendance, participation in programs. As an example here is from our IVE² program, which is the monthly switchboard check-ins. So these are people who participated and came through the front door at our IVE² program, which is an innovation center at our downtown library. And we've had over 30,000 people come in and participate in those programs, and they track them monthly so that we can report that back up to the state. Lastly, on a quarterly basis, we need to report back information on the companies that are supported through the program. So many of our programs have fallen into a series of different categories, including talent, training, public space improvement, facilities, and entrepreneurial supports. Given the impact of COVID, we're expecting a broad range of potential other priorities, including business survival and job quality. But for those programs that directly support companies, we need to be tracking on a quarterly basis and reporting back to CT Next information on the companies that are supported. So for example, in the Make Haven facility, there are about 14 companies that use that space for their operations. They range from design firms to a company that frames local artwork and ships it out on a subscription basis. And that supported company information includes things like their total number of employees, as well as some top-line information on the investments that they're receiving. I'm just checking back out to see if we happen to have any questions. I'm going to stop here in case anybody wants to jump in. Excellent. So I wanted to talk just a little bit about the application itself. So we attempted to balance getting the required information in order to make a decision for our board with trying not to be too onerous with the materials that were required. So our application can be found online. I'm about to hop to it to walk through the different steps. But there are 18 questions that we're asking. Most of those questions can be answered with between 3 to 8 sentences. We're not expecting long, lengthy essays and want to make this as accessible. We're really valuing clarity of idea over lengthy dissertations. I'm about to also go over some of the budget template, which I'm happy to help assist with, and want to focus that in developing your proposal, there's a strong prioritization on clear goals and timeline for the plan that you have put together. So the application is due at the end of August. The decision will be made by the end of September, and we're hoping to have funding available as soon as the middle of November. But as with many state programs, it depends upon contracting timelines and how quickly we can get some of the information together to do the due diligence on the programs. This is a good time to recommend that we have had a variety of different types of grant recipients. Most of them have been nonprofit organizations, but in a few limited circumstances, there have been for-profit groups that have gotten awards. Most of our awards are intended to go to projects and programs that support economic development rather than direct capital investment in businesses themselves. The recipients of our awards need to be in good standing with the state, which means that there are 3 letters that will require our grant recipients to receive once they are chosen for grant funding. And that means that you basically need to be up to date or in compliance with the Department of Revenue Services on your taxes, as well as in compliance with the Department of Labor for the variety of government obligations that your organization has. I'm going to hop over to our website quickly. So New Haven Innovation, nhvinnovation.com, is our new website that will be populated with more and more information. The front page shows this is a Threads by Tea, which was a venture of our Collab program. It was actually a pitch night event at State House, another one of our grant recipients as a venue. Grant funding, this is actually a student who was supported through our program at the BioPath at Southern, and sort of provides a brief overview of the types of awards that we have given. And here you can apply for funding at our link, or you can go up to our link at the top of the page. This is a team at Make Haven that actually created a Mars habitat that won about $32,000 in grant funding to create a facility that could be made out of the materials on the Martian surface. It has actually become a company that is now making not just structures for space, but a variety of different designs for emergency response and shelter. So our link at the top of the page takes you to this list of resources. The application guidelines go over some of the things that I'm talking about here. The budget template is a way of structuring the budget proposal. And the application questions are a document that has all of the application questions themselves. So to apply, you'll go here to our online link that takes you to a Google form. This Google form has each of the different questions, as well as the place to upload the required materials and any additional pieces that you would like to submit. However, as this is a form, it can be a little tedious to actually fill out your application. So we highly encourage you to develop your questions in a Google document or a Word document and then copy and paste them into this form. To make that easier, we've created this application draft that has all of the questions that appear on our form that you can use to fill out the application. So walking through the different components, the first set of questions is about what is your proposal, starting with the most simple question of, in one sentence, what is the proposal's goal? We then really want to know about how do you define success, how will you tell it's successful or unsuccessful, and what is your vision for this project? How does it fit into the current offerings in New Haven? We don't want to be duplicative of other services that exist in the city, but if you have a particular reason why your program is going to be different from a similar program that is currently offered, then this is the place to describe it. Maybe that it's serving a different population that requires levels of cultural competency or outreach, and maybe it's offering a different impact. And we want to hear what that impact is going to be a few years into the future. The next set of questions asks about how your program was developed, and particularly how the impact of your project or program is going to play into the diverse neighborhoods of New Haven, and particularly around issues of economic and social justice. So we want to know, and this I think is one of the key questions for me, is who is your project designed to help? And please be as specific as possible. We find that clarity in the type of organization or the population that you're attempting to help can really make programs much more impactful. And so this can be a particular type of a business. You can say your program is really focused on helping sole proprietorships hire one additional employee. Or you can be looking at people who have not completed a four-year college degree but have some work experience, getting them computer science skills to work at a new company. We also want programs to be thinking very deliberately about what are the external impacts that their project might have, both directly as well as indirectly. So are there any populations that your project might impact or affect negatively, and how have they been included in your planning process? Who is underrepresented in the fields that you're working in, and how are you going to include them in your project? And what extra policies or practices outside of your project are interacting with those underrepresented populations? So the next section, after we've gone through what you're trying to do and how does it fit within a vision of a more just economy for New Haven, is really the specifics of your program. And so this is an opportunity to upload documents about the project's budget, which I'll get into in just a moment. We also want to know, other than grant funding, are there ways that we can help to support your vision organization? This means that if we are not able to support your program with a grant award from CT Next, what are the ways that we can help connect, champion, or feature the work that you're doing? In the previous instantiation of the Elm City Innovation Collaborative, we wound up working on advocacy that passed about 7 different laws, one at the state level and the rest locally, and really had a focus on what we were able to do to support the broad set of goals, not just through financial awards. So online as well is our proposal for a budget template. Now this budget template might look initially a little bit complicated. I'm very willing to help work in filling it out. It can be simplified depending upon the type of program proposal that you're offering, but it's structured in a way that just requires you to ask the questions that we're going to ask about how your project fits together. So it's filled out with an example project of a computer skills training program. And it has sort of a year-long timeline. So this program would be offered by an organization that would be training people to have particular computer skills. And it has almost an even payment throughout the course of the year for a $50,000 award from CT Next. And it has a match that is primarily upfront costs, but has some ongoing contributions. So for this program, the majority of the upfront cost comes from this capital expenditure, where the match is really building out the space where this training is going to be taking place. In addition, the program match is paying for the program coordinator, who's really going to be running the entire operation on a part-time basis. So this could be a part-time position within the organization. It could be part-time for somebody who already works with the organization. The CT Next grant is going to pay for the instructors. So $33,000 of the $50,000 award is focused on paying the people who are actually going to be training in the classroom. And then the rest of the funding really comes in for the licenses and materials. So in this model, the organization that is proposing this is paying for the program management, some of the equipment and build out, though that's matched by some CT Next money, and is buying all of the licenses for the program. The CT Next grant is paying for the instructors, as well as the licenses, materials, and contributing to the build out of the new space. Down here at the bottom, we just have a list of all of the different sources of cash match. So this is the different line items, and it shows the form of documentation that we're expecting. So purchase orders or a contractor invoice, payroll can all be used to document those expenses. Now this budget does not need to be your final budget. This can evolve and change over the course of going through our grant award process, but it will need to be finalized before we reach final agreement. I, as well as some others, are available to help coach in putting this together. The clarity that this sort of format allows does break out program expenses that we expect to be recurring throughout the year, with capital expenses, which we consider to be a one-time outlay. This also changes how we track the outcomes, because we have different goals for things that are large capital investments as compared to program budgets. So this is one way of calculating cash match or planning for it, in which the organization is paying primarily for licenses, for example, or splitting things in different ratios. One other way to consider is simply splitting costs down the middle. So if you have a $50,000 ask for a grant and are contributing $50,000 from your organization, then we can simply cut out the entire budget and split each line item 50-50. What that would mean is that if there are consultants that you're bringing in to help with something, if there are purchases that you're making, we would just split those invoices down the middle. Reimbursement. Are there any questions on the budget template before I move on?
Hey, Michael, I have a really quick question, and thank you so much. This has been really informative. If I want to apply for this opportunity and I don't yet have matching funds, can I go ahead and do that?
Absolutely. That is a great question. So we want to hear good ideas of things that should be happening in New Haven, whether or not you currently have the matching funds to qualify for the grant award. So in our application guidelines, which is on this site, we have a particular treatment where at the bottom of our piece, we do encourage people to submit their idea without changes. And what this means is that if your organization doesn't currently have those funds on hand, it may be that you applied for a grant and it's pending. We want you to apply. If you are thinking of fundraising for this project, if you were to have a matching grant, we want you to apply. If you have an idea for a program you wish you could offer and don't have any of the matched together, we still want to hear your idea, because our goal is to have our board select a couple of ideas that we want to spend time helping to fundraise for and do partnership development on. And so we want to hear your ideas. If you have an idea that you're considering putting in, there are two ways to do that. The first, if you are fairly far along in a sense of what your program is going to be, we would like you to fill out the application online using this Google form. And even if you don't have funding, we'll be able to use this to evaluate how we want to proceed and move forward. If you have an idea for a program that may not be as flushed out as filling out 18 questions to describe your idea, we would like you to submit your idea using this form, which is a little bit simpler, which is simply send us a description of what you're thinking. It can be as simple or as detailed as you like. This can be as simple as if you find a video on YouTube talking about some challenge or program somewhere else, if you have an example of something that you wished existed in New Haven, you can send it to us as simply as possible to make sure that it crosses our desk and we can see how we can support helping that idea come to fruition. The bounds within which we have to operate with our CT Next funding are set by the state, which has a strong preference for having impactful investments that are leveraged against private dollars. But what that means for a lot of organizations is that it sets barriers to participating in these grant programs, because a lot of organizations, particularly organizations working for social and economic justice, don't have economic resources to contribute and are seeking grant funding to keep their ideas happening. We want to make sure that we are able to help work with those groups to reach the level of accessing CT Next funding, and that may mean that we take a longer timeline to develop proposals that we would like to help apply for additional funding and help serve as a validator and as part of your team in making it happen. I also want to give a shout out to Oni, first for asking that question, and second, I'd like to introduce him to the group of people on the call as the chair of the New Haven Innovation Collaborative Board.
Hello all, thank you for joining us today. Michael, you're doing a great job. I appreciate you.
Absolutely. Thank you, Oni. A pleasure to work for you. Are there other questions from people on the call related to what we've covered so far?
Yes, good afternoon. I have a question. Good afternoon.
Absolutely.
Mike, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Yes, good afternoon. This is Shafiq Abdusabar. So I am a business, contracting and commercial janitorial. How can this particular grant process, is this something that can assist me? For instance, I have a project that I'm considering that will transition high school students that are not going to go to college, that are not really sure about what their next steps are. It would allow them to come into the company, get professional training, and then lateral into a position that would actually pay them. So I would be looking at something like a 30-day window that might help cover some of their training costs, potentially some low-cost equipment. Is this something that I would be eligible? Would this funding help me do that?
Yeah. So the I would be very interested in seeing that application. Is the first thing I want to say. I like the idea of that program. The ways that we've approached a lot of our workforce investment have very much been focused on the line of sight to a job. So there are some that have been 2-year programs, 6-month programs, and programs that are certifications directly linked to a business. We have not had a serious barrier to considering programs that are run by for-profit entities, as long as the program is structured in a way to benefit the program participants and our service that is offered. What I would say is that one of the things that I always think about in framing the project proposals is that question of who benefits. And so as long as the program is designed in a way that the participants are gaining skills, and whether that's certificates or just training that can benefit them either at the company that you're working with or at other similar companies. I think that's one of the key goals, is making sure that rather than simply being a training subsidy for one company, that this is a standard that will benefit the program participants in whichever field that they are stepping into. And so our particular focus from CT Next in the past has included high growth businesses or entrepreneurship, the ability for people to start their own businesses. And so I would encourage you to consider if there are ways that alongside training to participate as a contractor in the work that you're doing, there might be a component that can include perhaps an apprentice program in what it means to put together a bid, or some of the other work that goes into eventual business ownership through the industry that you're working in. So I would say that the aspects of the program that you just described that seem most encouraging to me are focused on the development and self-sufficiency in the skills of the people you're working with. I ultimately am not involved in making the decision. That's definitely for the board and would be the basis on which how they approach it. But I was thinking if there would be a question about the applicability of the funds, it would be ensuring that the training is benefiting the participants in whatever business or team they wind up working with, rather than simply as a training subsidy for one company, which we haven't approached in the past. But if you make a compelling enough argument that in the midst of COVID, this is a worthwhile and impactful investment, I could see the board considering.
Thank you.
Are there other questions on a similar topic? Okay. So with that, I covered the online application, the budget template and how it's put together, as well as the ways that we're going to be evaluating, or the people who are going to be looking at these project proposals. The last thing that I want to spend a little bit of time thinking about is just describing the different types of strategies and projects that we've launched in the past. And so for the last 3 years, most of our investment have fallen into 4 categories. I'm seeing Melissa Mason is raising her hand, though. Melissa, did you have a question?
Yeah. Yes, I did. Sorry, I was trying to mute.
I'm sorry, my apologies. I'm having a little bit of technical difficulties in hearing your question, Melissa.
Michael, I think it was all of our internet. I couldn't hear it either. It's not yours.
Okay. Yeah, sorry, Melissa, would you be able to test your connection and ask that question again?
Employment.
I'm sorry, Melissa, could you try that once more? I haven't
Can
been
you
able to hear
hear
your
me
question.
now?
That's a bit better.
Can you hear me? Sure. Okay. Can you hear me now? No.
Better than
All
before.
right. I'm working without any power here, so how about I type my question?
That would work as well. Anybody else who would like to
Yeah,
submit a
I
question, as
will.
well, please feel free to type it, and I'm happy to respond that way.
Can you hear me? No? Okay, I'm going to type my question.
Actually, that's much clearer just right now.
Okay, sorry. Still without power. I'm typing.
Michael, I have a question as Melissa's typing. If we are partnering with two organizations who help us subsidize payroll for our members, does that qualify for matching?
Potentially. I think it would depend upon how the organization is structured as a grant. But if you're launching an initiative that includes payroll costs, then there can be multiple sources that go into that payroll, and so and I think going to Melissa's question, multiple organizations can collaborate on one application. What we would like to see is preferably for each application one lead recipient that we would actually coordinate all of the paperwork with, so that there's one organization that's really responsible for delivering the program, and that one organization is responsible for handling the paperwork and reporting, but that can include participation from multiple groups. So it can be, I think, to Melissa's question about like a workforce organization working with educational partners, having 3 or 4 partner organizations together, I think is something that we would really like to encourage and support, and particularly in using our grant funding to develop new partnerships and handoffs between related groups. And similarly, Marina, the range of partners that you have helping to support your work, it doesn't need to be just one organization, but can be multiple others. I think our hope, if there is a strong benefit to the matching requirement, it is that it develops multiple sources of funding for programs that we hope leads to ongoing sustainability, so that these programs are not just dependent upon our funding, but we can use our funding to catalyze ongoing relationships.
Thank you.
Yeah. Going to Kim's question, Kim asked if there's a maximum amount of funding that the board would consider for a project. We have not set a maximum amount, and I don't think the board has articulated an interest in doing so. The largest award that the board has considered was a $500,000 award as part of a larger project. There was about an $8 million total project. That project wound up not happening. But the largest other award that the previous board gave was a little bit over $400,000 for a capital facility. Actually, the second largest award was also $300,000 for another capital cost. So I would say apply to us for the amounts that you think you need in order to get your project done. And if that amount is beyond the scope of what our board is interested in being able to support, we would like to point you in other directions that might be more appropriate. Given the scale of our funding, we've done a little bit less than about $2 million a year of grant awards, and that's included a range of a portfolio of projects. And if there's, for example, say, a big project that you are asking for $1.5 million for, if the board decides that that's not our main priority for the year, that we would like to hand that off to other sources that might be better fit, say state funding or other philanthropic or investment dollars. Excellent. Are there any other questions from folks on this call before I do the last wrap-up items?
Michael, I have a question about partnerships.
Mm-hmm.
I was wondering, for collaborative projects, is there a requirement for how developed the partnership between organizations is, or can the partnerships be at any stage?
So we haven't set a formal requirement about a partnership, and part of that is what it means to apply. I think my personal hope would be that this grant application might be an opportunity for organizations to come together in a new partnership. If there are some questions on the application that ask about the team and sort of what's the team's background and experience is. And so we'd be interested in just hearing laid out, what your vision for that partnership would be. If a partnership has not existed before as part of their grant application that's coming together, I think as part of our due diligence and compliance, once the project's selected, we would like to perhaps formalize what that relationship is in a written document, just so that we have a plan for the year. But please feel free to use this as an opportunity to apply with new partners.
Thank you.
Okay. So with that, I'm going to jump back into the screen share to just share the last couple questions before I wrap up. So we talked about the budget proposal itself. The last couple questions, going to exactly your point, talk to about partner experience. And so we're interested in hearing about, how you see yourself within the landscape of the rest of New Haven's program offerings. So what gap are you specifically filling? What other organizations are doing the work similarly to you? So if that's an opportunity for partnering with them, or if you're really filling a unique course offering. We want to know sort of just what your team's experience is, if you've done something like this in the past, and how you've measured its success. We like investing in teams that have a track record, but we also like investing in thoughtful teams that are doing this for the first time and really want to provide support and mentorship or as much as we can for those teams. The second to last question is a new question that we've added for this round, which we'd like you to describe the demographic composition of your organization's governing board and staff leadership team. So for a for-profit organization, this would be the actual owners. For a nonprofit, this would be your board composition. And we'd like to know just a little bit about the demographics of the folks who are actually going to be running and executing the project. This is part of the awareness that we have for what state investment economic development means for anti-racism and economic inclusion, not just in who are we serving through the programs that we fund, but who are we funding, who's literally getting paid out of our grants. And it's something that this board is interested in considering as a portion of our funding work. And then the last question is, we want to just know some of the motivations that you have personally, the person completing this form, for doing the work that you're doing. As a way of short of a lengthy interview, getting to know you and your passion and interest. So I think this describes more or less the application mechanics itself. Probably the one thing that I do know that I accidentally missed during the budget and match conversations is there is one thing when planning your budgets is that we have not approached or we have not considered space costs for grant funding. So that means that we don't count match for rent and we don't pay for rent. So our hope is to support program offerings in spaces. We have spent our funding on helping to fit out spaces. So if you have a new set, a new site that requires special equipment, particularly, for example, for commercial kitchen space that's going to be rented to early stage food companies, we've helped support the installation of HVAC systems and bought equipment. But we don't cover rent costs or site acquisition costs. So the last couple slides before I sign off is going to be just an overview of some of the previous areas that the Elm City Innovation Collaborative invested in, and sort of shows just some of the thought process that went into some of our previous investments. So our previous investments fell into sort of these 4 categories of specialized facilities that it wouldn't make sense for businesses to build themselves at an early stage. Connective public spaces to build community in a welcoming and inclusive way, because sites with startup businesses can often be exclusionary or unwelcoming. Investments in local entrepreneurs, so that's local entrepreneurship training. As well as local technology talent development. So training New Haven residents with the skills they need to work in our innovation and technology fields. So as an example of this, we looked at all of the patents that are generated since 2000, which has a strong impact of biochemistry, of a lot of federal investment driving life science companies. And so some of our investment was looking at, in the life science sector, how can we have the facilities that these early companies need to grow locally? And how can we train New Haven workers to get the jobs at those companies? Within software, we were looking and we figured out that New Haven actually has a fairly robust digital software startup rate. We found about 45 companies that had started in New Haven in the last 8 years. About half of them had left, and most were going to California and New York. And so we invested in connective public spaces to build community, particularly welcoming community that was connecting people to talent. And then we were training local technology talent. So starting with programs that combated the digital divide at the very top of the talent pipeline, as well as a 6-month certificate at Gateway Community College to get people job ready, and culminating in a 2-year program at the Holberton School to take people from 0 to 60 to have full software skills as a full stack developer in a way that was low cost and accessible. I want to hit this theme on the left, and it's driven a lot of our choices that our programs have focused on trying to be a greenhouse rather than a magnet. So as compared to accelerator programs that bring in companies from around the country to sort of speed date New Haven, a lot of our investment has really driven how do we provide an infrastructure of opportunity to New Haven residents to develop skills or companies or technologies or products that are based here in local connections and that we can see grow here. So those have been organizations like the IVE² program at the Innovation Center at the library, the Collab entrepreneurship support programs, groups like Make Haven that provide training for local entrepreneurs doing fabrication. And the last thing that we're often thinking about is how can we have the largest impact with public economic development investment. And very often, some of the things that are typically considered flashy entrepreneurship have a particular model and demographics of looking like Silicon Valley. And what we're finding is a lot of the research bears out that some of the most impactful investment can come from unlocking the potential in underserved communities that have as much entrepreneurial spirit, but have lacked traditional access to the resources and networks that provide capital and that provide access to grow businesses. And so we're very much interested in seeing projects that take that question of how can opportunity be generated and invested through trainings, through capital access, through facility access for Black and brown communities in New Haven to help those entrepreneurs and founders and workers access the innovation economy. The last thing is that our board's in a very active conversation about what is innovation. The program that we receive our funding for has the title Innovation Places, and our board believes very strongly in interrogating that idea of what is innovative and what are the ways that that definition both can empower people to develop new things, but has also historically excluded people from doing things that are considered innovative. And so innovation can be considered a variety of ways, from products to business models, but we want to provide perspectives and resources to programs that are challenging the idea of what is innovation, and are there ways that we can think of programs or policies that are innovative in driving economic well-being outside of a traditional sort of product patent investment model. So that's my overview of what some of the focus of our efforts to generate project proposals for this grant opportunity are, and want to open back up for any questions from this group before we wrap up here today.
Yes, Mike, I have another question.
Absolutely.
Can you hear me? So I guess it's made by two questions. The first one is, does your agency produce or have figures of the amount of dollars that actually go out in terms of support? Who did it go to? So like in terms of organizations or for-profit businesses that are Black owned, Hispanic owned, African American owned, what is the percentage of the funding that you guys put out in terms of support? Where does that go? And I applaud you all for the work that you do. However, some of the programs, a majority of the programs that you mentioned, or initiatives you mentioned, really are things that box out currently because of job skills, because of where people live, because of educational restrictions, meaning that they may not have the ability to pay for a higher education. And particularly a lot of African Americans in New Haven are boxed out of these things. I mean, I don't know too many African Americans that own biotech companies or startups or tech companies or startups. And it sounds like a lot of the initiatives that have been put forward in the past that you guys have supported are the jobs that are atypical for African Americans in New Haven, which is a big company comes in, they get award money, they get supported, such as all of the startup groups in Science Park where they had the incubators there and folks got started up. When the companies get big, it's like, okay, now we have training programs for the African Americans so they can try to work here. It's kind of like Alexion and what we saw happen with Carter Wynn Stanley and these different things. So since we understand that that is how New Haven has historically run, and I think now with COVID has surely exposed around the country why sometimes that's not a good thing, how can you all modify what you're doing to try to redirect that money into those communities, African American, Hispanic, Latinx, poor communities where people got great ideas, they got the hard drive, they have the skill set to launch what they need to launch, but it sounds like based on some of the stuff that you're putting out in terms of what you've supported in the past, it's gonna bypass that. How are you guys planning to address that?
Yeah, so I think you bring up a very good point. Sorry, I saw Oni, you just unmuted. I don't know if you want to jump in on this one, but I'm happy to answer.
Yeah, I would just like to say a couple of things. So I think, first off, hello, Shafiq, how are you? It's been a long time. Look great. I hope you're enjoying your retirement. I think you brought up two very good questions. The first one, we do not have that data. That's something we're going to try to work this upcoming year to get, just understand the race, gender demographics of the individual projects that we deployed funding to. And I think to your second point, the best way I can describe it, it's almost as if we're pushing on a string, right? So in order for us to be successful, we want to see a vibrant, very diverse ecosystem. And we're doing things like this so people like you can know that we exist and apply. That's all it is. So and I think it's a difference between, and I apologize for the background noise, it's a difference between accessibility and availability. I think all these resources are available, but it hasn't been accessible to the Black and brown individuals in New Haven for such a long time. And I think myself as board chair, working along with the rest of the board and Michael, we're that much more intentional in saying that you're absolutely right. And in order for this to be the ecosystem where everyone can thrive, we need people like yourself to apply for this. And we're trying to make the application in a way that it lowers the barriers of entry and provides a lot of opportunity for Black and brown business owners to take part in this funding that's coming from the state.
Yeah, I think I'd build on that to say that I think you bring up some very good points for the economic development trends in New Haven. And a lot of that is that the private money that's flowing into the city is driven by private investment in a lot of the technologies that are coming out of Yale that require very high levels of education and very narrow access points in order to participate in, particularly from a lot of the wealth creation aspects of that come from owning those businesses that receive millions and millions of dollars of investment. And so the previous approach that was taken in programs that worked in bioscience and in software were particularly focused on what types of goals can we have to broaden access to the sectors. So for Southern Connecticut State University, that question was, how can we provide access to the lab skills that people need to get these jobs, and particularly at an undergraduate level? So we were investing in paid summer research fellowships because one of the chemistry professors there said, for example, that his best student had to work at Kmart over the summer because she couldn't afford to take the free internship. That was going to be a key stepping stone in that career. And so a lot of the programs that were previously invested in were really focused on what are the steps along that ladder that take somebody to a sustainable career in this field. But I think I'm very willing to admit and perhaps even champion the idea that some of the sectors that are driving the investment-driven, the investment-based economy here in New Haven are particularly exclusionary on the basis of education. So in the software field, for example, the programs that we invested in, like at Holberton, is a 2-year program that has an income share agreement. So rather than an upfront tuition cost that would be a barrier, it's free to attend, and then program graduates share a proportion of their income afterwards, which has, in Connecticut, an average income of over twice New Haven's median income. And we found that, and I think Melissa Mason, in talking to that program, very quickly identified that even though that's lowering a barrier of cost, that's the full-time aspect of that program can still be exclusionary. And so the program launched a pilot of an income stipend for students to be paid while they attended, and are looking at other models of perhaps even part-time attendance so that those skills can be developed to try to provide more access to these sectors that are exclusionary. All of that is to describe some of the previous work that has been done, and as we go through the rest of this fall, we're going to be coming out with reports on each of the previous investments that we've made that include an analysis of the project's efforts to have racial and economic justice goals within
the work that they're doing. But I would also say that with this transition to the New Haven Innovation Collaborative and ONI's leadership, the new programs that we're trying to invest in are building upon that to say not just how do we benefit populations that have been underserved in New Haven, but how do we create more pathways for Black and brown organizations and companies to apply for our funding so that we are directly funding and empowering leadership and programs that are driven by African American and Hispanic leadership. And so there's a little more that I can say than the proof is in the pudding for the types of decisions that we're able to make and the types of grant awards that we're able to give. But that is very much in our minds and in my mind as the staff director for the work that we're trying to do in this direction.
Hi, I'm not so sure you can hear me. Mr. Harris?
Yes?
Yes, hi. My name is Devon Kennedy, and I just have a quick question. I am the founder and executive director of Elephant in the Room Boxing Club on Orchard Street.
Mhm.
And we've been there approximately 8 years. It's a nonprofit organization, but it's a youth program. But most recently, I've been thinking of another way that I could assist youth by possibly hiring the young people who are taking the class with CONCAT through Science Park,
Mhm.
their phlebotomy program. My idea is to open a mobile medical lab where we can provide COVID testing when they come up with treatment for the COVID virus, DNA, things of that sort, like a mobile lab where I can bring students from Comcast and hire them. But I have to say that I've been in business probably more so 10 years or so, maybe even longer. And this is the first time that I've actually heard about innovative collaboration. And I was just wondering, how do you get the message out to the community that this amazing program is available? Like I said, I've been in New Haven and operating this nonprofit more than 8 years, and this is the first that I've heard of it. Unless I'm extremely out of touch, I just feel the message also, or the strategy used to sort of market this impactful program is not it's not working. But I also would like to say, I know this is an innovative program, and I know we focus on biotech. And based on what I just mentioned in regards to the medical lab, does that sound like something that fits the criteria for this funding?
Yeah, so I got a few thoughts in response to that. The first is I think that sounds like a great program and initiative. I would love to have you apply. The second is that while that first slide featured some information on biotech, biotech has not been the focus of our investment overall. I think that bioscience has received about 1/5 of our total grant awards, and that includes all of the programs that we run at Southern. And that a much larger percentage of our funding has gone to programs that support local entrepreneurship. And that's something that, for the last, this program has been in existence for 3 years, and the previous version of it was a grant application that was sort of a 3-year plan that was awarded by the state. And so there have been fewer opportunities for this sort of public call for funding. And in this new version of the organization, this is our first attempt to do this kind of public outreach to develop new proposals. And over the course of the fall, we'll be coming out with more and more opportunities to shape not just ways to receive funding, but also public strategy development to talk about how should this organization, as well as the city as a whole, be thinking about economic development. What should our actual goals be? How should we measure them? What are the sectors that we should be focusing on? I think that COVID has really demonstrated substantial need in restaurants, in entertainment, in the creative economy for arts and culture, so that artists and chefs and service workers really are at the forefront of a lot of the impact, and particularly the data is showing that young Black and brown workers are the most impacted. And so thinking about how can we develop ideas for programs that can meet that need directly, and make that a goal that we can use public discussion to set expectations and accountability for our partners at the city and at other organizations. So thinking about a program that would be local employment coming out of the CONCAT phlebotomy program, I think that definitely would be something that we'd want to consider and would be eligible. In that, I think there's a couple different ways to think about framing that program, because there's clearly a healthcare delivery goal for the community. There's also a goal of employment. And so what we would be interested in, what I personally think would be a compelling proposal to share with the board would be asking the question of, is there a way that we can use a health